Fintech Chatter, brought to you by Tier 1 People, leaders in Fintech executive search. Welcome to Fintech Chatter, the show where Fintech leaders join me for a bit of a chat. I'm your host, Dexter Cousins, and today's guest is the one, the only David and Brear from 11FS. 11FS builds next-generation propositions for challengers in the financial services industry. That's existing firms looking to innovate, startups looking to scale, and everyone in between. They're also the creators of the de facto Fintech podcast, Fintech Insider, which is where you may have heard David's voice before. 11FS turned 7 years old in 2023, and I invited David onto the show to reflect on the last 7 years and discuss what the next 7 years will look like, not only for 11FS, but the global fintech sector as a whole. But before I chat to David, just a few things happening here. First up, we're working on a chair and board director search with one of Australia's most respected and loved fintechs. If you're an ex-tech founder who scaled globally, or an ex-banking exec now in fintech, you can express interest by reaching out to me on LinkedIn. We're also on the hunt for a Sydney-based chief product officer with a lending fintech. This is a GM-style position with P&L responsibility across the portfolio of lending products. Again, reach out to me on LinkedIn if you're interested. And finally, if you're new to the show, make sure to give us a follow and a review. And if you're watching, subscribe and like. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be back.
It's awesome to have you back. I will be eternally grateful that you were guest number 2 when I started this podcast. And I thought it would be fantastic to bring you back on and kind of have a little bit of an origin podcast. So mentioned in the intro, you turned 7 this year, and I think, is it April?
Yeah.
This year where you celebrate?
April 5th, I think it is. Yeah. I mean, it's a funny one. I think it's like when you get older as an individual, I think you stop counting precisely when it was after a couple of years, but I think that probably says more about how busy we are than anything else in that sense. But you know what I'm talking about, Dexter, as well, right? It's you're turning 7. You've just turned 7, haven't you? So you're a couple of weeks ahead of us, right?
Yeah. So as we speak, 7 years ago, exactly this year, I was absolutely shitting my pants, wondering what had I done, because it was the last day of my job, and the next day I was, embarking on launching Tier 1 People. So I'm sure there's probably a similar story coming from you as we talk today. And no, if this one goes well, we should maybe do like that documentary series 7 Up, and then we'll do 14 Up and 21 Up.
And then we'll get to that like 30 years later. Where are they now? Like that obscure story of those both follically challenged gentlemen. Like where are they now? Yeah, it's it's an interesting one, isn't it? Well, I mean, like that origin. I always kind of think like superhero movies. The origin story is the most interesting piece of it, like the background of Spider-Man, background of Iron Man, etc. So, actually getting that almost what was the genesis for the beginning in that sense? How did that start for you? Why did you leave corporate world to go and build a business?
I actually left corporate world probably in around about 2012. And then, kind of had I would say like the perfect step in that I went and joined a much smaller business, became a partner in the firm. There was 4 or 5 people in it. And it was as much as having your own business without having the risk.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as if it was this massive leap of faith that, I've seen so many people in my network do, where they've gone from a big bank and then started their own fintech. What was the genesis for you? Like, what was the burning thing that made you decide to go out on your own?
Well, for me, I think it's I think like most startup founders have a completely deluded sense of, do you know what, I reckon I could do this better. And actually, in my instance, that was that. I'd kind of worked in a big bank, I'd worked in a big insurance company, in a big Indian offshoring company, and lastly a management consultancy. And actually, for me, I was just like, look, there's got to be a better way of doing it than this. Like the limitations that the organization is creating for the quality of the work that can be done, but also the limitations that they're creating around the people that they employ. You know, like every organization is fighting for talent, and that the talent is almost inhibited by the organizations. And it's, in some instances, it's silly things. I mean, it's like, look, you give anybody a kind of a, 5-year-old laptop with everything locked down so you can't really do anything, they're going to struggle to make great things happen. But in other instances, it's the culture of the company, it's the rituals of the organization that really inhibit an individual being able to really fulfill their potential. So, I kind of stood back and went, do you know what? I think with the different set of variables, with the right group of people, then fundamentally, I think we can do a better job. And 7 years later, I mean, as I say, I think when you make that leap, I think you underestimate just how hard these things actually are. So we've both come further than I expected, and not as far as I would have wanted in the same guise. But I think that's probably what keeps us getting up and doing more of this is, we know the journey's mostly ahead of us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. What was the kind of idea for the business as it started? And maybe it's before we talk about what the idea was, where is the business at now? Because I want people to have a bit of context. As you said, with this Marvel origin story, we already know what happens, to Wolverine or whatever. So where is 11FS at now? And, what would you say are the kind of key areas that you operate in?
Yeah. So like I say, just about turned 7 years old. We have been very busy over the last 7 years. I have to say, like we've built, I think it's 12 challenger propositions for various different players in various different parts of the world, from Hong Kong with Standard Chartered on things like MOX, in the UK, building an SME bank called Metal for Alice and Rose at NatWest. But we've done it over in the US, in Saudi Arabia, all over the world, basically. And it's been a lot of fun. We've both been building new greenfield things and sort of taking startup mentalities to those, but also working with, very large incumbent banks to basically remove a problem for them, solve it for them, and then help in-house that as well. So, a big bank in the US wanted us to build an account opening process that could open an account in 27 different countries at the same time. It was something that they'd spent quite a lot of money and quite a lot of time on. And I always kind of come back to, for me, it's not really what the problem is. It's the way that you approach it. It's not what you do, it's the way that you do it. And for us, taking that same approach, whether it's a, gigantic global bank or whether it's a brand new greenfield startup, it's what's the quickest, cheapest, best way of putting something in the hands of the consumer, because everything else is essentially noise around the edges. Startups look to really validate things as quickly as they can and kill an idea or make it successful. And really, I think corporate world, and it goes back to, again, that genesis of why build the business in the first place. Corporate world's just got very comfortable with things taking a long time and costing a lot of money. And so much of what we do is trying to get people to understand that that's not the best way. Just because you spend a lot of money on it doesn't mean it's going to be successful. And if that was the case, every bank's digital transformation program would have transformed them. But here we still are. So and actually, what we've done over the 7 years as well, we started as a services business with an idea around different products that we wanted to build. But actually, over that 7-year period as well, we've taken the profitability we've gained by being successful with that services business and reinvested it into building products as well. So Pulse is a global benchmarking tool that can allow people to see the best experiences around the world and steal with pride, as we say. A design pattern is already done, therefore steal with pride, and that's gone tremendously well. Hundreds and hundreds of banks using that and putting really their fingers on the pulse, as we say in that product. And then the other one is Foundry, which is an orchestration integration capability, which allows people to build intelligent services as quickly as we can, which is very different from the way in which the first 18 months to 24 months of a project really goes. And that's going really well. It's an interesting point for that, actually. If you ask me again in a couple of weeks' time, there'll be a very different answer to the first few lineups of it. But we've got actually some really interesting conversations with it, not a million miles away from your neck of the woods, actually. But and it's one of those ones that for me, we're seeing more and more interest in that actually in this period, because I think banks have come to a realization that they've got to sort that stuff out. Again, the way in which they make change happen is fundamentally the thing that's putting risk into their system and cost into their system, and them changing that is probably the biggest priority that they've got right now.
One of the things that I love about catching up with you, David, and just hearing about this story is that, well, there's two things actually. First, the fact that you bootstrapped, and then second is, and it's something that I've done with my business has been, kind of almost, just one of the things I've been really firm about is this isn't a scalable business. I can't kind of replicate me and scale me. And I've seen so many consulting style businesses, whether that being recruitment, management, consulting, where we enter these types of periods that we're in now in economic downturns. And all of a sudden, your customers have got 30 days notice to kind of cut off your supply, and you're left with 100 people and all this cost. And I've seen many people that I admire and respect, go through really bad health when going through those periods. So the kind of diversification, and the approach that you took to that, I think I remember saying this to you when I did episode 2, was that if you'd have had a VC back you, probably wouldn't have allowed you to diversify the way that you have, and you would have to stick with, just do the consulting piece, or just do Foundry, or just do Pulse. Which kind of leads me on to, the next question is, when you look back over this last 7 years, like, what is it, what's the big thing that you think you've learned? First of all about business, and then about yourself.
Yeah, I think, I think if we sort of almost kind of look at the way in which we've been successful, it kind of comes down to relationships. People say that, and I don't think unless you're running a business, you realize how important building sustainable relationships are with people, and actually, you sort of say about, scaling the founders or scaling people. I mean, it's weird because it's the thing. I don't think any of us as founders are actually very good at sales, and actually, I don't mind that. Do you know what I mean? Like, I really don't mind that as a thing. I think we're very good at building relationships, though, and actually, those relationships are based on trying to add value as much as we can to solve a problem. I think the thing that I think really struggles, if we look at the competitive set from our perspective, the sort of generic consultant doesn't have an opinion, doesn't really care about the problem. They're there to get a day rate. They're not there because they care about the industry's issues. And that's why we started this business. We could have easily have just not, Jason founded Starling and Monzo, like, he don't need to work anymore. Like, actually, our CTO built Nutmeg. He doesn't need to work anymore. Like, but we're trying to build the change in the industry, that, that fabric, that underlying fabric. And I think that makes it a different experience for the people that we're working with, because actually it's not about doing what the client says. It's about doing the thing and showing why we believe that this thing is materially the best thing for them as a business, and materially the best thing for them as a consumer, for their consumers. So often the first part of the work that we do with anybody is really getting them to understand really what their problem is. And actually, that's been an amazing privilege to kind of see those changes happen, whether it's, again, Alison Rose at NatWest, or whether it's Bill at Standard Chartered, or, various different people in various different guises. They've done their role, and they've been at those organizations for a while, and actually helping shift their frame of reference for what their customers need, or what an organization should be in, 2023 and wherever. Actually, that's a real privilege. So, I mean, I kind of look back, the secret, I guess, to our successes is being a little bit brutal, like having a real opinion, and taking the time to actually formulate a proper opinion about the industry or a problem, and then being I think, incredibly empathetic to how hard this stuff actually is to make changes happen. Having been in a big bank, this stuff's difficult to make happen, but actually it doesn't mean that it's not important, and it doesn't mean that it shouldn't happen. I think the other thing as well, I mean, you say about, scaling founders. I mean, definitely one thing that I've kind of learned is like, people are just seriously unpredictable. Like, actually there's things over the 7 years where I'm like, whoa, like I just did not see that happen. Like actually changes in, people who've worked at 11FS, or changes in people who we've worked with, or, and you're like, it becomes quite scary, because essentially, particularly when you're trying to build an organization that is so value based, so we're massively, again, I come back to like the biggest inhibitor in corporate world is usually the corporate's processes inhibiting their people. And our mission at 11FS is very much about unleashing talent. So we try and do everything we can to make sure that actually people can do the best work that they've ever done, because if they're successful, then we're successful in that way. But yeah, there's been, I mean, like one a year, I'd say, where I'm just like, wow, like I did not see this coming. And the challenge with that really is, it would be easy, I think, as the founder of a business, the CEO of a business, it would be easy to almost give up, I think. And that probably for me has been the hardest thing, is kind of sticking to what you believe in, and sticking to what your vision is, your mission is, even in the face of really significant adversity in terms of, push to change the way in which things are done, or actually, the greater success that you have and the bigger that your organization becomes, the more you can feel the dilution of the intensity that you really want to kind of bring to things. So remaining sort of true to that level of intensity is I really think it's the key to success in that sense. It's not losing a view of where you're trying to get to, and not really losing the recipe for actually how to make it happen as well.
We're both big believers that working in a startup, being in that environment, is akin to being in an elite sports team, high performance culture. It's amazing that you see so many startups, and particularly in tech, who kind of talk about this family narrative, and we're a family. It's just such the wrong narrative. Whereas if you think of an elite sports team, you have people who come in every season, right? Like, January, new players come in, some exit. July through to September, new players come in, some exit. Yeah, I believe that kind of constant, changing of people coming through the business is actually a really healthy thing for performance sports, and particularly in businesses that, if you consider where you were 7 years ago to where you are now, it's probably been 3 or 4 different iterations of your business and model, and the people that you acquired. And
do you know what? I'd say at least 3 or 4. Yeah. I mean, I'd say every 18 months or so, you've got to be kind of pushing for a new level. And that requires often a kind of a reflection of what's got you from here to there is probably not going to get you from there to where you really want to be. And vice versa, actually, when you're building a new thing and moving out, and that's really difficult, because essentially you're placing bets, you're taking sort of leaps of faith with people, and ultimately that's what all of this comes down to, right? It is people. Like, in that sense, any business anywhere in the world is a people business. So how you place those bets, and as you say, particularly when you're a bootstrap business, failure, you can only do so many times without that being, really existentially, a crisis in that way. So, but it's been an interesting one to navigate.
Failure is never fatal, but he never worked in a startup, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the challenge, I guess, from an industry perspective as well, though, is that, actually, when you, to your point, when we started businesses back in 2016, then actually the types of people that were in the market were very different from the types of people that are in the market now. And actually, look, the types of people we could attract was very different to the types of people that we attract now. Like, we were, nobody and had done nothing, and the brand had no recognition. But when you brought people in, you were very confident that they were there because they believed in the vision, they believed in the thing that you wanted to. When you become successful, people are joining you to be part of the success rather than necessarily to make something successful. And actually, I think the challenge for many organizations, I think, is, founders do all of I did most of our hiring for the first, I don't know, maybe 2-3 years of existence. And actually, the further away you get from those things, I think the more paranoia you've got about, well, what types of people are we bringing in, and what does that do? Because, ultimately the people make the culture rather than the business making the culture. But actually, to your point around, sports, well, it's pretty obvious on a sports field the impact somebody's having or not. But actually, in a business, most of the impact is not seen by you as the CEO in that sense. So you've got to kind of really put in processes and people throughout the levels of the organization who, to your point about the canary in the mine, they very much need to be the early warning, the early flood signals for kind of change in a negative way in that way, I think the other thing I'd sort of say is, like, culturally, I think society's in a very different place now than it was even back in 2016 in terms of what society or what startups deem important. And I think that's a perversely negative thing for many organizations, because I think the unbridled focus that you get when you start a business, I think really what you're trying to avoid all the way through, successes and, what that brings and the scaling and the challenges that brings is focusing on doing the right things and not spending too much time focusing on the wrong things. It's so easy to, support every cause or, spend time on everything or whatever. But actually, as a business, you've got to be incredibly focused on why you're in business, else you won't be. And it's a funny one when you look at corporates spending hundreds of millions of pounds on, essentially trying to buy credibility or goodwill from communities, but on the flip side are doing horrific things, and it's almost it's like carbon offsetting for your culture. It's like it's not there's no amount of investments into women who code or diversity courses or whatever that you put in place if your culture is toxic on the other side of that. So I don't know. I feel, having seen both sides of it, the kind of veneers of culture in those organizations, and even some of the biggest consultancies on the planet as well, the kind of transformations that they're going on with regards to their culture as well, I think really only probably mostly a skin deep.
Yeah. On the kind of culture piece, we talked a little bit about 4-day work weeks and kind of joked about being business owners. Wish we could have a 4-day work week. We've heard a lot as well about boomerang employees and kind of, as you mentioned, organizations who are kind of offering all these great things. None of it seems to be about doing actual work that you kind of get to leave a legacy about. I've got a little kind of one of the things that I had written in my journal that I dug out from 7 years ago when I came my first black book that I wrote in my thoughts. And at the top was a line from the movie Gladiator: "What we do in life echoes in eternity." And I kind of read that and I was like, oh, great. You kind of got to remember that one daily. How have you found now it is attracting the right people that the mission has changed for many, right? So at the beginning it was you were the challengers taking us on. Now undisputably the most recognized consultancy in this space, right? Competing against big four management consultant firms. So how do you go about making sure that you're attracting the people that are there for the mission, and they know that the mission isn't doing a 4-day work week and supporting good causes, but it's actually it's a elite sports team that, hey, you're training every day, you're giving everything to the team. You've got a clearly defined role that you've got to give 110% to, and you got to eat right, you got to prepare right, you got to do all those things.
Yeah, I mean, it is a really interesting challenge, that, and actually, I think and actually, I mean, we sort of say about the sports metaphors on that one, and actually, a friend of mine got in touch with me. If actually, when I bumped into you, Dexter, in Singapore, I was doing a talk out there. They had a stage that was all about kind of pioneers, things, TED Talk type talks, and mine was really about what do you believe is the secret to success? And I sort of said, I mean, fundamentally, I just think it's a habit. Like I think I don't not like every day you wake up and you drink your success smoothie or whatever. Like, but fundamentally, if you figure out the routines to do the right things daily, then essentially it's just your attitude and your effort that determine whether you're successful or not, or at least increase your chances of success, essentially. And I did say, like, it's very similar to sports. Like, if I tried to do all of my exercise, once a month, then actually I'm going to hurt myself and probably not be successful. Like brushing your teeth, right? You don't brush your teeth once every 3 months really, 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 really well. You have to do it daily to make sure that you've got great, oral hygiene. So actually, I kind of think in the context of, the talent and the structure around it and the narrative around that, it's got to be something that you speak to, and whether it's your vision, your mission, the things that go around it, the changing of the water when things are not working. I think the difficult thing with that, and again, I sort of come back to, is it is a difficult one. We're an incredibly, almost painfully transparent organization sometimes in terms of the level of transparency that we breed at when things are brilliant and when things are not so brilliant. And actually that is difficult. But I think it goes back to, you don't just get to be who you want when you're winning. You've got to always be who you want regardless. And actually that, for you as an individual, is a North Star that is fundamentally in your control. Like, the brilliant thing that the reason why I think it's similar is, the brilliant thing that, I say about attitude and effort is the key to success. I mean, that's something that I stand up and talk to, bunch of bankers at Singapore Fintech Festival, but that's exactly what I say to my kids every day. Like, actually, the beautiful thing about that is your attitude and your effort are fundamentally in your control. And actually your ability to control, those two things will be the determining factor whether you might be successful in the future. It's not guaranteed, because, freak things could happen to anybody. But those things materially increase your chances. So when it comes to, running a business and understanding talent and everything that goes with it, I can focus on how I want to be as a human, and actually setting the standard for what I expect everybody else to be. But it doesn't mean that I can make them that. And actually, it's difficult, because I know we've talked about this in the past. Like, some of the hardest things that I've had to do in the last 7 years have been letting go of people that I really, 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 really liked, but fundamentally were just not the right people for the business. And actually, it's interesting the more you recruit, and the more you kind of get a taste for what works and what doesn't work within your organization, the more brutal that really is in that sense, because the repercussions of actually having the wrong person in the wrong place. I go back to what I said earlier on, though. Sometimes, and it is taken me by, absolute surprise, that somebody just completely goes off the rails in a way that you just wouldn't have expected for whatever reason, the pressure at home, or hiding something, or whatever. But dealing with that is really, really hard, particularly if you've got, I mean, there's been instances. I mean, there's an instance now where I'm literally legally obligated. I can't stand up and say it to people, and that's hard, because actually, in a situation in an organization where transparency is the norm, then actually there is always some things that you can't talk about. And it creates an interesting dynamic of of transparency to a level, but actually the inability to change those things, you know? I mean, and I should say as well, I mean, again, this is not, I don't want this to sound like it's like, you know, sermon from the mount type thing. I mean, even in negative periods of time, you know, in bad things, I still think you've got to do that. And actually, we've gone through periods where, you know, we've had a few recently, we've had a gigantic client move 3 projects to the right. We've had to let go of some people at 11FS, and that's horrific to do that in a context of such a, you know, a human-centric organization. But we've tried to go through it with as much transparency and as much empathy as we can do to really explain, you know, stand up and take the hits and try and explain those things. And when I kind of look back on my career, and you know, when I was at you know, big corporates going through, you know, right sizing, or you know, whatever terminology was kind of put on those things, it was very different. You know, it was an OD that appeared on a wall with 4 less jobs in that box than there was before, and then essentially it's a, you know, it's a musical chairs for who ends up with those roles, and it's all by spreadsheet, it's all by, you know, not by communication, and you know, people aren't talking to people like human beings. And I think that's the challenge with corporates. And actually, if I'm honest with you, I think that's the thing that people are looking to move away from big corporate organizations, because essentially they want a more sort of real experience. They want to feel more connected with the organization that they're working for. And that, for me, is the point. You know, nobody gets out of bed every day and works so hard for all of their life for something that they don't believe in. Or if you have to do that, you're probably not very happy. So actually, if you can find people who fundamentally believe in the thing that they're trying to do, and actually with financial services, the beautiful thing is it touches so many people's lives, and the industry is so far away from delivering on the potential that it has, that actually there's a very long road for us to solve so many different problems in so many different geos, in so many different slices of banking. And that's really exciting to me. The other thing I'd sort of say as well is, like, I kind of feel like it's been a computer game the last 7 years. Just one where you just don't have another life.
If you were going to describe it as a computer game, which one would it be?
I mean, I'd say it's like a platformer. I mean, I'll go back to, like, I was a Mega Drive guy, so like Sonic. It's like playing Sonic, but with one life, because essentially, increasingly, the bad guys get badder. You know, the competition gets bigger. Initially, you're not even a blip on their radar in terms of, you know, causing a problem. But when you start winning work from them, they start mounting a bigger defense. And so, you know, the levels get a little bit more testing, and the bad guys, the bad boss at the end of each level gets bigger in that way. But the objectives are still the same. You know, the things that you're there to do, and the people that you're really looking to for support through that period are the same as well. And for me, that's the really, really important thing. You know, there's a bunch of times over the last 7 years that, you know, I would have given up, if I'm honest. Not because essentially, you know, I'm a quitter or whatever, but trying to build a international business with a, you know, multi-million a month revenue, that's not easy. Do you know what I mean? And if it wasn't for people like Sean, our chairman, or Jason, you know, one of the founders of the business, or Ross, one of the founders of the business, or Zoe, my chief of staff, there's no way I would have been able to keep going on this stuff, because, you know, success fundamentally is a team sport. And actually, you know, without that team, there's no way you can keep going on that stuff. There's no way you can do everything yourself, however good you are. Do you know what I mean? Like, best sports people in the world still need a team. You know what I mean? And actually, you know, increasingly, I'm kind of realizing that, you know, despite all of my, you know, basketball background and, you know, the people that I look up to and the things that I do, you know, I'm not Michael Jordan on this team. You know, I mean, I'm more Phil Jackson. So actually, you know, I've got to be in that. You almost kind of figure out what your role is over time, and figure out what those people who are, you know, forever people who are around you, and then figure out how you can complement each other to do something bigger than any of you could do as an individual. And that's been really the most exciting thing is seeing those people flourish around us as well.
Cool. Now, I want to talk about the podcast and the origins of that as well. But before I do, when I was at Singapore, one of the things that was really cool was when I walked in there first morning, the opening address, there must have been at least 5,000 people just in that opening address. It was huge. And then straight on after the headline act comes David Brear. How did that feel, like walking out to a room full of your peer group, and it's the biggest fintech festival in the world by some mark, and there's 5,000 people there, potentially clients, and you're coming up for a bit of a chat?
Like, honestly, and it's weird because my daughter Ivy asked me that as well. I didn't have any nerves doing it at all. I think, and you'll know this, Dex. I mean, like the first 10 podcasts you did, you might have felt a little bit more nervous, but at this point, you're just chatting with friends, right? And actually, I mean, I was lucky enough. Joanne, who's the CTO of Credit Suisse, and Andy, who's the CTO over at JP Morgan Chase. I mean, it was just a good conversation we were having, right? I always try and make those things just like normal people having normal conversations, rather than it be a kind of bravado fest type thing. So yeah, I mean, whether it was 5 people or 15,000 or whatever, like actually it's just 2 or 3 people talking about something that they're deeply passionate about. So I did like, actually, beforehand, because like you say, it was the deputy prime minister of Singapore beforehand. We were all stood in the back room, in the green room, before coming out, and you know what I'm like, I'm always t-shirt and jeans type thing. So guess who he mistook for the AV guy before we went out, which was great because it was like I was like, I mean, I think they're over there, but I'm on after you. So like, and we had a laugh about it. But Joe, I think it's great though that actually, again, an event like that where you have the key people from the regulator, key people from industry, from the government, from startups, from and actually bringing them together to be passionate about the change that's really happening. It's a very exciting time to be there. I'll definitely be back next year as well.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So FinTech Insider, I make no, I don't hide the fact that I, listened to that religiously and then emulated, the business plan, and got so inspired. And we talked about founders not being very good at sales. And when I started Tier 1 People, the promise that I made was, you're never making a sales call again. You're never sending resumes out, right? And the podcast has 10x'd, revenue for my business since taking that on. So such an incredible strategy. But what gave you, which I'm never taking claim for, I always give you guys credit for it. And whenever people mention it, I say, yeah, I just copied 11FS, right? Not as well, but kind of emulated, I should say. What gave you the inspiration to do that, and how did you get it off the ground?
It was an interesting one, really, because I mean, we were really lucky. I mean, I working at Gartner, I managed to create a great network of people who, at a certain level, had benefited from the work that I'd done with them before. So actually, the interesting thing that I found was, I mean, I sort of felt like there was almost it's like that Hamilton, I want to be in the room when it happens moment. And actually, we were really lucky to be in many of those rooms, having fantastic conversations with, people who were really excited about transforming their organization, or fundamentally about transforming the industry, solving customers' problems better. And actually, really what we just thought was, do you know what I mean? It would be it's a shame that it's only us hearing this. And there was a few conversations specifically. There was one with Marco Wentworth he was starting Solaris Bank at the time. And we were just like, this is brilliant. Like, this will change the industry. If you guys get this right, it will be. And actually, we just sort of thought that needs to be heard by more people, There was another one, actually. I was over in Nairobi at a speaking gig, and me and a guy called Neil Cross, who now runs a
caught up with Neil last week.
There you go. Well, I mean, he's outside of banking now. He's running a orangutan sanctuary and a diving school, but previously head of innovation over at DBS. So me and him were chatting in the back of a cab back to the airport, and actually I was like, people just need to hear this type of thing. We got stuck at a passport checkpoint for like 20, 30 minutes, and we're just chatting in the back of the cab. And at that point, it was just like, do you know what? I think if we brought a sense of kind of fun to these conversations, then actually people would get a lot of value from it. This Dexter has been successful, because you are fun and you bring a fun style to it, but you bring value to the community.
I take no credit, right? It's the quality of the guests, right? Like that's why I asked you to be guest number 2, right? It was like, if you're going to do it, like, go big, right? Like that's, I think that's that for me is all the fundamentally the success of my podcast anyway.
Well, we always try and say, it's got to be as entertaining as it is informative. Because essentially, you said this earlier on, people choose to listen to you when they're walking the dog or cleaning their car or like commuting or whatever. So this isn't like download a PDF and read it at your desk. This is like stuff people are choosing to do in their private life. But actually, that gives you a fundamentally a different relationship with your customer base. And actually, that's been the really exciting thing for us. I mean, and really the community we try and serve has supported us, all the way through the last 7 years. And I hope over the next 7 years, that'll be the most consistent thing through that is, as the podcast has got bigger, and I think we're on like 190 something countries or something now. I actually stopped looking at the numbers and stopped, because you sort of say about going on stage with 5,000 people or whatever. It's like, actually, when you start thinking that, through the mic, you're talking to like millions of people, like, that's crazy, isn't it? And actually the sort of impact that could have about, changing your style or, tightening up, if the scoring the goals really, really important, people take the shot really differently. But actually, you've got to kind of remember the things that made you successful and keep doing those things, keep serving the community, keep talking to great people, keep having fun while you're doing it. Because as much as people listen to the hour you do a chat, it's a lot more effort than that, as you well know, right? Getting the right people, going through the process, getting that team together. And I should say, there's a reason why the first person we ever hired at 11FS was a videographer. Michael Bailey still works at the business now, because essentially, in order to take the amazing things we're hearing, and actually the things that some of my favorite moments of of 7 years have been, me and Jason on a flight on the way back from a workshop. And it's like we've pattern recognized something a client said with like 10 others, that then you can create a piece of content that so beautifully summarizes the problem, And actually, I've been lucky enough to have maybe 40 or 50 of those moments over the last 7 years, and actually I know that actually if we can keep the conditions for those 40 or 50 moments and replicate them and continue those things, then essentially I'm sure we'll continue to be successful in the way that we have been to date. I think the biggest threat, I think, to organizations being successful is probably believing that they've become successful. Whereas I know very painfully that actually, the journey ahead of us is much longer than the one behind us. And for me, that's exciting. I'm thrilled to get out of bed every day and have the opportunity to mess up.
Now, you talked about numbers, and one of the things that you can't measure with numbers is impact. Over this last 5 years, 6 years of listening to Fintech Insider, I've then gone to events and people have sat on panels, and I'm like, you just listened to that episode of Fintech Insider. You copied it. I have got no doubt, because I've even seen these people rip off your content, that one of the unintended consequences of the podcast is you've actually given content to competitor management consultants who go in and wheel it out. How does it make you feel to see that your kind of your podcast that started from humble beginnings has had this massive ripple effect, and possibly kind of shaped a lot of what we see in fintech today.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind that at all. Like, actually, that's good to me because, and actually, I've had at least 30 or 40 times where somebody has took a picture of consultancy X's financial services platform battleground and showed me a thing, and it's like, yep, that's our diagram. Like, but actually, like, for me, that's a sign of success, right? Like, actually, there was the first company that did sneakers, and then everybody else copied them because they set the standard. There was people who create genres of music, and then people emulate it because they like it. For me, we're really clear. Our vision of with 11FS is all about changing the fabric of financial services, and that's something that we're not going to do on our own. This isn't a single player game. So if we can infect other people to believe the things that we believe, then inevitably that's going to have an impact on the industry. Inevitably that's going to have an impact on our competitors in that sense as well. And that's good for me. Is it bad for our revenue streams? Would we make way more money if we patented these things and trademark them and set them up? Probably. But would we have as bigger impact in terms of the changes that we wanted to? No. And for me, we started the business to change the fabric of financial services. This is really what we're focused on doing.
Yeah, look, I've got the same philosophy. I think all ships rise with the tide.
Absolutely.
But as a business owner, you do get pissed off when people really take the piss.
I mean, there was one. There's one particular example of that. There's one of the biggest consultancies on the planet, right? Literally, they approached us to buy 11FS, and I was like, we get one of those, I'd say, every 6 to 8 weeks, and it's nice because it's flattering, but I'm not interested. You know what I mean? And I chatted with the CEO of that organization, and gave them because we're super transparent. Here's my philosophy. Here's what we believe. Yada yada yada. Right? And told them some stories about where it is. Their company report comes out like 2 months later, and he literally ripped a story that I'd told him and put it in his CEO note at the beginning of the report. I screenshot it and sent him an email. And I was like, dude, you're that like, and he was like, do you know what? I genuinely thought that I didn't mean to rip you off. I thought that was something I thought. And I was like, you thought it because I told you it, you know what I mean? Like, so, but after that though, I was like, do you know what? Is that actually success? Because, for me, again, the podcast is great. It touches more people than I could ever speak to. So actually helping people change their frame of reference, it goes back to why we did it. We want people to hear and have a shifted frame of what the potential for financial services is. And look, if that's the CEO of one of the biggest consultancies and competitors on the planet, or whether it's a student just coming into financial services and getting excited, if we can help shift reference points, then essentially the industry will get better because of that. So yeah, even if it's a bit annoying sometimes, it's still directionally correct for success, right?
Awesome. So you're not selling the business. So what does the next 7 years look like for 11FS?
Yeah, I mean, we're at an interesting point, really. The revenues for the services business has got to a really good scale. The Pulse business has got to a good scale. Foundry really is the beginning. It takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of capital to invest in building the business in the way that you want it to be. But the opportunities.
Embedded finance seems like it's about to take off now as well. It's there's been a lot of talk about it for quite some time, but it really seems it's getting a bit more traction now.
Yeah, and the maturity in the market is definitely there. And actually, I'd say the maturity in the partnerships that we've got with our friends at Griffin, who are doing an amazing job, and at Google, who are doing an amazing job. I actually think the sort of the next 7 years are going to be more of a foundry story than anything else, really. You talk about it would be inevitable, I think, if we scaled our organization to be 10,000 people, that there would be a detrimental impact on the quality of the things that you can do, because what you can do with 300 people is fundamentally different than what you can do with 10,000 people in terms of the bar of quality. So the products that we're building are basically to mean that we never have to do that, because actually Foundry for us it's the first 18 months of any project. And actually, if we can remove the need for that, it sounds sort of counterproductive, because essentially we're doing our ventures business out of, again, if I was insert, name a big consultancy here, I would just keep doing the same bit of work and over and over and over and over and over again, right? But actually, I know talented people don't want to do this. Like, I'm pretty sure you and our CTO would quit. Like, if we were like, oh, Jesus, we've got to do that 10 more times, he would just not want to do that work anymore. Yeah. And not because he's like a diva, but because he is a bit of a diva, but not because he is a diva, but because, the monotony of anything. If you ate marshmallows for every meal, it would get boring, right? So
there's actually something that I've recognized within the top performers, and it's a trait that they all have. I'm not going to call myself a top performer, but I've got this quality as well, which is the moment that I start to get comfortable is when I'm my most uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's like there's something goes off inside me that I'm like, oh, this is the beginning of the end. You've got to take some action. You've got to change things.
Yeah. And it's interesting that, isn't it? When you're running your own business, essentially those motivational factors are predominantly intrinsic, aren't they? So actually, when I got bored at Lloyd's Banking Group, or I got bored at, wherever, the challenge, if you're not, but that's the weird thing though, is like, actually, because I remember when I was at Aviva going to present to the board and not being nervous. And I took that as a sign that actually I'd learned all I can learn and I need to move on. At Singapore Fintech Festival, my pulse didn't change before I went out on stage. And it wasn't that I was bored. It's just that I'm so comfortable now that anybody in that room could ask me anything, and I would feel comfortable saying, I don't know the answer. If it's the intricate details of the payments capability in Thailand or whatever, I'm like, I don't know, but I'll go and find out, And I think the coming to terms with not needing to know everything about everything is actually quite refreshing in that way. But no, I mean, for the next 7 years, for me, it's going to be a story of, now the brand's got to a certain scale, we're getting asked to do much more complex things. At the beginning of this story, we were being asked to come in and do strategy, and no business goes out of business because of some, PowerPoint, right? At this stage, we're being approached for, materially outsourcing core infrastructure to 11FS that we will run for them in a highly regulated environment for 5 years. So it's a weird one. The responsibility that comes with that, you can't just be some bravado on a podcast. You know what I mean? You really got to know your stuff to make those things happen. And that's exciting to me because, not losing what's made us successful when you're successful, I think is the most critical thing for us to just keep reminding ourselves. And the next 7 years, look, it's going to be more difficult levels, bigger bad guys, more complexity, people doing things that I would never expected and could never predict. It's just going to be more of the same. And that's the thing that I really enjoy, is that it's more of the same, but it's completely unpredictable. And that makes, as I know it is for you, Dexter, as well, makes every morning you get out of bed and turn on your laptop or open your iPhone or sit down it makes it exciting because you don't really know what's going to happen next. And that's probably the most exciting thing about it.
Awesome. Now, in terms of region, when you started 11FS, the UK was undoubted king of fintech. It seems to be that things are changing a bit, and it's not as perhaps on the ascendancy that it was. When you look across the globe, which region do you think in this next 7 years could have a chance of perhaps overtaking the UK and being the king?
Yeah, it's a shame that transition, as you say, and the weird thing is, I mean, we had Lord Holmes in the office a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, and we talked about this. And actually, I feel like the UK has kind of given up the lead, really, because of Brexit and because of, some of the regulatory changes that have happened there. Bizarrely, I mean, obviously, I think Singapore, Asia more broadly, from a scale perspective, is doing amazing things. But I think with the climate that we're in, I think GCC has the potential to really eclipse a lot of things that are happening. The level of, we just put an office down in Dubai, and actually you look at the scale of change that's happening in the regulators, the level of investment that's happening in the region. I really think the GCC more broadly has the potential to really transform themselves in terms of what they are there for, the level of capability across the regulators in those regions, and actually fundamentally transform the lives of people. We talk about underserved, overcharged, overwhelmed. You look at a country like Egypt, where it's like 65% of the population are unbanked still. Like that is an amazing opportunity to start at a fundamentally different place in that way. But I think there's a difficult reflection point though for the industry more broadly, because we look at and this is something that I really hate about the industry, if I'm honest with you. It's like it's become so fashionista. Every year there's like, what are the three things that you're going to be? And I detest that in such a, I find it revolting, because it leads to NFTs, and it leads to Web3, and it leads to crypto, and it leads to, what's hot, like with the fashion industry. And actually, I hate that so much about the industry, that actually they're always looking for the next 60-second abs to solve the problems, when the problems are much more fundamental than that, and that they never really go away. We're sort of an industry that is so wasteful. There's billions of pounds wasted on transformation programs that never transform anything. And when you think of all of the problems that the brutal realities of day-to-day lives for normal people, outside of financial services, who don't understand what an APR is or percentages or anything, like I really feel if businesses got back to the core values of solving proper customer problems, they'd approach all of these things fundamentally differently. And actually, the reflection point for the industry is that, we've shifted service from, great services to just self-service. And, the Western world thinks they're so advanced because people are doing payments on a mobile phone, and that's not solving customers' problems. People are retiring with less money than ever before. People are, got no money in savings over such a long period of time. And, debt is mounting in ways that people didn't even know was debt, with buy now, pay later and all these different things that are kind of come about. I really think over the next, we talk about, what's for 11FS over the next 7 years. I really hope for the industry over the next 7 years, we go to, we've got, again, algorithms driving cars. Like, why are we not serving people better? People keep talking about, let's educate customers. And it's like, people don't want to be educated. Like, if education was the issue, like, everybody's got the internet. Like, if you want to go and learn about compound interest, YouTube exists, but so education isn't the answer. Helping people be better off is. And I think that's the transition that I want to see over the next 7 years is companies that fundamentally are not just saying they're on the side of customers in their marketing, but showing it with the actions that they take on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, look, I think we're united there. For me, fintech so far has been, from a innovation perspective, very much in the back end. As a customer, I'm still getting the same products that I have for the last 30 odd years, and don't see that changing, really. I mean, that's the sad thing, right? Don't see that changing despite open banking, CDR, and we're just not seeing the step change. So I think, I'm also very keyed in on what's happening in the Middle East, and I think that's there in Southeast Asia, the two regions where, if you look at the potential of blockchain technology, digital assets, that's really where I can see it taking off. And as you said, you're starting from a there's no legacy infrastructure to an 80-year-old mainframes to try and navigate. So yeah, I think that definitely is the area to watch from my side as well. David, it's been fantastic chatting with you. Congrats on the last 7 years. I want to thank you for coming on the show, but I also want to thank you and the whole team, past and present at 11FS, for the impact that you've had on the industry. Look, without doubt, I don't think my business would be where it was if you guys hadn't done what you've done. I think the impact that you've had on the community continues to, just have really positive ripples. And it's just, it's just great to see you going from strength to strength.
Well, thank you very much for having me on again. Hopefully we get to chat in, 7 years from now, and let's figure out where we were at that point in that sense. But I think you overestimate any impact we've had on making your business successful. I think sometimes just because you're the first person doing something, it lets other people realize that they can as well. And often what's missing from people sometimes is just the spark. And if we've provided that spark to anybody, and that's led them on to putting in all the effort and putting in all the work to do the things that they need to do, then I'm super proud of that in that sense. But no, I know look, I haven't been getting out every day and doing your business, Dexter. That's been you, and you've definitely made that a success, and that's a fantastic thing to have seen grow over this period of time as well. So thank you very much for having me on. Mate. Super appreciate it, and let's not leave it at 3 years again, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. So where can people find out more about 11FS?
Yeah, so you can just head to 11fs.com, or if you want to kind of find me, I'm predominantly lurking on LinkedIn. I'm just David Brear on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And thanks for listening, folks. You can connect with me, Dexter Cousins, on LinkedIn and Twitter. If you're coming back, thanks so much for your support. And if you're new to the show, please follow us and leave a review. It really helps me in connecting and finding more fintech fans and giving them access to great guests like David. Until the next episode, stay safe. Fintech Chatter is presented by Tier 1 People, leaders in fintech executive search. We'll help you find world-class fintech leadership talent to build world-class fintech ventures. And you can find out more at tier1people.com.